We live in an age strangely devoted to distraction, as though the highest purpose of man were to be endlessly entertained. Silence feels suspicious to us. Stillness feels like failure. If a thing does not glitter, if it does not shout, if it does not offer immediate pleasure, we are tempted to call it worthless. And so focus, quiet, patient, often invisible, seems unbearably dull. But perhaps boredom is not the enemy we imagine. Perhaps it is only the doorway we refuse to walk through. For most things of lasting value do not arrive with applause. Strength is built in repetition. Wisdom grows in reflection. Character is formed in unseen choices. The man who masters his attention is not merely learning how to work, he is learning how to rule himself. We are told to chase excitement, yet excitement is a poor architect of a meaningful life. It gives sparks, but rarely fire. Focus, on the other hand, is the discipline of choosing what matters over what merely dazzles. It is the quiet refusal to surrender your mind to every passing impulse. And that is why focus feels boring, because it asks for something deeper than pleasure. It asks for sacrifice. It asks for order. It asks you to believe that what is unseen today may shape everything tomorrow. We often imagine addiction as something dramatic, something visible, destructive, and easily named. We think of substances, of reckless habits, of obvious ruin. Yet some of the most powerful addictions arrive dressed as normal life. They do not alarm us because everyone around us is participating. They are praised, even rewarded. Distraction is one of them. To be distracted is no longer considered a weakness but a way of living. A man can scarcely sit in silence for 5 minutes without reaching for a screen, a notification, a voice to fill the emptiness. We have become uneasy in our own company. Solitude feels like punishment. Stillness feels unnatural. The mind, once capable of deep reflection, is now trained to jump restlessly from one object to another like a bird startled by every sound. This would matter little if distraction were merely harmless amusement, but it is far more serious than that. What we give our attention to, we give our life to. Attention is not a small thing, it is the doorway of the soul. Whatever continually enters there begins to shape us. A distracted man is not simply entertained, he is divided against himself. His thoughts are borrowed, his desires are interrupted, and his purpose is weakened by constant interruption. There is a quiet danger in this because distraction rarely feels painful at first. It feels pleasant. It offers relief from effort, escape from discomfort, and protection from the unpleasant work of facing oneself. It is easier to scroll than to think, easier to consume than to create, easier to chase novelty than to remain faithful to one difficult task. Distraction whispers that a little delay is harmless, that one more moment of avoidance is deserved, that tomorrow will somehow carry the strength we refuse to use today. But the soul is shaped in these small permissions. A life is rarely ruined in a single decision. It is eroded in fragments. 10 minutes wasted here, an hour surrendered there, a habit of divided attention repeated so often that it becomes character. We wake one day not because disaster has struck, but because we no longer know how to stay present with anything that truly matters. The student cannot study deeply because his mind expects constant stimulation. The writer cannot finish because silence feels unbearable. The believer cannot pray because stillness has become foreign. The friend cannot listen because attention has been trained to wander. Distraction does not merely steal time, it steals depth. It makes us strangers to patience, and without patience, very little worth having can survive. There is also a curious pride hidden within distraction. We often excuse it by calling ourselves busy, as though constant motion were evidence of importance. Yet business and purpose are not the same thing. A man may rush all day and still arrive nowhere. To be always occupied can be another form of avoidance. The question is not whether we are doing much, but whether we are doing what matters. Focus requires humility because it demands that we choose. To focus on one thing is to say no to 100 others. It means accepting limitation. It means understanding that a meaningful life is not built by touching everything lightly, but by holding certain things deeply. Distraction flatters us with the illusion that we can have it all at once. Focus reminds us that greatness is always selective. And perhaps that is why distraction is so dangerous. It does not look like destruction. It looks like comfort. It looks like harmless entertainment, harmless delay, harmless noise. Yet a mind that cannot remain still cannot become strong. A heart that cannot endure silence cannot hear truth. And a person who cannot direct attention will always live at the mercy of whatever shouts the loudest. Boredom has acquired a terrible reputation in our age, as though it were a sign of failure rather than a natural part of being human. We flee from it with remarkable urgency. The moment silence appears, we reach for noise. The moment repetition begins, we search for novelty. We have trained ourselves to believe that if something feels dull, it must also be meaningless. Yet this is one of the quiet deceptions of modern life. Many of the things most necessary for growth arrive without excitement. They come in ordinary clothing. Discipline is repetitive. Learning is often slow. Prayer is often quiet. Practice is rarely glamorous. The foundations of a strong life are built not in moments of thrill, but in seasons that feel almost painfully unremarkable. Boredom, then, is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is simply the threshold between childish desire and mature purpose. The child asks constantly to be entertained. The adult learns to remain faithful even when entertainment disappears. One seeks stimulation, the other seeks substance. The trouble is that we often carry the habits of the child into adult life, expecting every worthwhile thing to feel immediately rewarding. But reality is not arranged for our amusement. The musician must repeat scales before beauty emerges. The athlete must endure routine before strength appears. The writer must sit with empty pages before words take shape. The soul itself is formed through repetition, through returning again and again to what matters, even when emotion has gone elsewhere. This is why boredom can be a kind of test. It asks a very simple question: do you value the thing itself, or only the feeling it gives you? If a person reads only when inspired, works only when motivated, loves only when it feels easy, then he is not devoted to the good itself, but merely to the pleasure surrounding it. And pleasure is far too unstable a foundation for any serious life. There is something deeply revealing about our inability to sit still. We say we are bored, but often what we mean is that we are uncomfortable being alone with our own thoughts. Noise protects us from self-examination. Constant stimulation saves us from confronting unanswered questions. Boredom strips away the distractions and leaves us face to face with ourselves, and that can feel far more frightening than monotony. It is in these quiet moments that truth often begins its work. Without distraction, we notice what we have been avoiding. We recognize our habits, our weaknesses, our neglected responsibilities. We hear the small voice of conscience that busyness had successfully drowned out. Boredom is sometimes the empty room in which honesty finally becomes possible. There is also a hidden strength in learning to endure the ordinary. A person who can remain steady through repetition develops a kind of inner independence. He is no longer controlled by the need for constant excitement. He can work without applause, wait without resentment, and continue without visible reward. Such a person becomes difficult to manipulate because he is not ruled by impulse. This steadiness is rare precisely because it is not dramatic. The world admires visible talent more easily than invisible endurance. We celebrate sudden success and overlook the years of patient obscurity that made it possible. Yet nearly every admirable life is built in private, in habits so small and repetitive that they would seem unimpressive to an outside observer. To pass through boredom is to discover that meaning often lies on the other side of monotony. What first appears dull becomes valuable once we stay long enough to understand it. The mind deepens, the character strengthens, and the heart learns that not every treasure announces itself with excitement. Some things must be loved before they can be enjoyed, and some rewards reveal themselves only to those willing to remain, where others grow restless and leave. We speak often of freedom as though it means the absence of restraint, the ability to do whatever one pleases whenever the desire arises. We imagine the free man as the one who answers to no rule, no discipline, no limitation beyond his own appetite. Yet this is a rather childish understanding of liberty, for a man governed entirely by impulse is not free at all. He is merely obedient to a different master. The person who cannot control his attention, his temper, his appetites, or his fears is not exercising freedom, he is living in quiet captivity. He may choose endlessly between pleasures, but if he cannot choose against them, his choices are only appearances. To be mastered by every passing desire is not independence. It is slavery with better decoration. Focus is one of the first signs of genuine self-mastery, because it reveals who is truly in command. The mind is a restless servant. Left unattended, it runs toward comfort, novelty, and avoidance. It prefers amusement to effort, impulse to intention, and immediate pleasure to long-term meaning. To focus is to call that wandering mind back and remind it that it is not the ruler of the house. This is not a dramatic act. It happens in ordinary moments. When a student continues studying instead of reaching for distraction, when a writer remains with the difficult sentence rather than escaping into easier noise, when a person listens fully instead of preparing his next reply. These are small victories, but character is built almost entirely from small victories repeated. We often wait for motivation to rescue us, as though discipline were something granted by sudden inspiration. But motivation is an unreliable guest. It arrives uninvited and leaves without warning. A person who depends upon feeling ready will spend much of life waiting. Self-mastery begins when we stop asking whether we feel like doing the right thing and start asking whether it ought to be done. There is something humbling about this because it forces us to confront our divided nature. Part of us seeks what is good, and another part resists it stubbornly. We know what strengthens us, yet we reach for what weakens us. We desire peace, yet we feed anxiety. We long for purpose, yet we protect our distractions. The battle is rarely between us and the world. It is more often between us and ourselves. Focus does not remove this struggle, but it gives it direction. It teaches the will to stand above the momentary demand. It reminds us that not every thought deserves attention, not every emotion deserves obedience, and not every desire deserves satisfaction. A mature life depends upon this distinction. Without it, we become passengers in our own existence, pulled along by moods we never learn to question. There is also a moral dimension to attention. What we repeatedly focus on shapes not only our productivity, but our character. A mind constantly fixed on resentment becomes bitter. A heart fixed on comparison becomes envious. A person trained to notice only pleasure becomes shallow. Attention is not neutral, it is formative. We become in part what we consistently behold. This is why self-mastery is not simply about efficiency or achievement. It is about becoming the sort of person who can be trusted with freedom. The disciplined man is not valuable because he accomplishes more, but because he is less easily ruled by chaos within himself. He can remain calm when emotion rises, faithful when excitement fades, and present when the world pulls in every direction. Such strength often looks unimpressive from the outside. It is quiet, it does not announce itself, it appears in consistency rather than spectacle. The man who wakes early to keep his promises, who guards his words when anger would be easier, who returns again and again to what matters. This man may not seem powerful to the world, but he possesses something rarer than admiration. He possesses himself. And to possess oneself is perhaps the beginning of all real greatness, for no victory over circumstances can compensate for defeat within. The person who commands crowds but cannot command his own mind remains fragile. The one who learns to govern his attention, his habits, and his desires has already won a deeper kind of battle. We have made a peculiar idol of motivation, speaking of it as though it were the secret force behind every worthwhile achievement. We ask how to find it, how to keep it, how to summon it on command, as though life were meant to be lived only when the heart feels inspired. It is a comforting idea, but it is also a dangerous one, for it teaches people to trust emotion more than principle. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are famously unreliable companions. They rise and fall with weather, sleep, praise, disappointment, and countless other influences too small to notice. A man may feel brave in the morning and fearful by evening, determined on Monday and exhausted by Thursday. If his commitments are tied entirely to these shifting tides, then his life will have no real foundation. Discipline, by contrast, is not concerned with mood. It asks a simpler and harder question: what must be done? It does not wait for enthusiasm to arrive before acting. It understands that many important things must be carried forward long after excitement has disappeared. In this way, discipline is far less glamorous than motivation, but infinitely more trustworthy. We are often inspired at beginnings. The new goal, the new plan, the fresh ambition, these things create energy because they promise transformation without yet demanding sacrifice. It is easy to admire the idea of becoming stronger, wiser, healthier, or more faithful. The difficulty begins when the ordinary labor arrives. Repetition replaces novelty. Progress slows. Applause is absent. The work becomes invisible. This is where motivation usually departs. It was never designed to stay for the whole journey. It is a spark, not a furnace. Useful for beginning, perhaps, but incapable of sustaining a life. Discipline is what remains when the spark fades. It is the quiet decision to continue because the thing matters, not because it feels exciting. There is a certain maturity required to understand this. Children are governed largely by desire. They do what feels pleasant and avoid what feels difficult. Adulthood begins when we recognize that meaning often demands the opposite. We keep promises when we are tired. We show kindness when we are irritated. We continue the work when boredom insists that stopping would be easier. Character is formed precisely in these moments, not in the emotional highs that everyone enjoys. The danger of relying on motivation is that it allows us to excuse ourselves too easily. We say we are waiting for the right mood, the right season, the right sign that now is the time to begin. But much of this is simply respectable procrastination. We are not lacking inspiration, we are avoiding responsibility. The person who waits to feel ready often discovers that readiness was something created by action, not a gift received beforehand. Discipline also protects us from the tyranny of self-deception. Motivation can make us feel productive merely because we are thinking about change. Discipline demands evidence. It asks whether we have acted, whether habits have changed, whether sacrifices have been made. It is less interested in our intentions than in our obedience to them. There is something deeply freeing in this, though it may not appear so at first. A life built on discipline is not constantly negotiating with itself. The question has already been settled. One does not debate every morning whether to keep one's word, whether to return to the task, whether to honor the commitment. The decision was made earlier, and discipline simply carries it forward. This saves enormous energy otherwise wasted in endless internal argument. We often admire extraordinary success without noticing the ordinary discipline beneath it. Greatness is usually hidden inside routine. The athlete returns to training when no one is watching. The scholar studies after interest has faded. The faithful friend remains present when convenience suggests leaving. These acts seem small, but they are the architecture of a meaningful life. Motivation may start the conversation, but discipline writes the story. One is emotional weather, the other is structure. One arrives without invitation, the other must be chosen repeatedly. To trust motivation alone is to build a house on wind. To build on discipline is to accept that strength is not found in occasional passion, but in daily obedience to what we know is right. We have become suspicious of silence as though emptiness itself were a threat. A quiet room feels uncomfortable. A walk without music seems incomplete. Even a few moments without conversation, without notifications, without some form of stimulation, can feel strangely unbearable. We rush to fill every gap, as though the soul might collapse if left alone for too long. Yet silence is not the absence of life. It is often the place where life becomes audible. Noise can entertain, but it can also conceal. It hides our fears, our unresolved thoughts, our neglected questions. A person surrounded constantly by sound may never discover what he actually believes, because he has never remained still long enough to hear himself think. There is a reason many people fear silence more than difficulty. In silence, we cannot escape ourselves. We meet our motives without decoration. We notice the habits we excuse, the conversations we avoid, the truths we postpone. Distraction gives us temporary relief from these encounters, but silence removes the disguise. It is an honest place, and honesty is rarely comfortable. This is why silence creates power. Not because quietness is magical, but because it allows clarity. A person who can sit with his own thoughts without panic becomes difficult to manipulate. He does not need constant approval to feel secure. He is not driven by every passing opinion, because he has learned to examine rather than merely react. His actions begin to come from conviction rather than impulse. The world often mistakes loudness for strength. We admire the person who dominates every room, who speaks quickly, who responds instantly, who fills every silence with certainty. But noise is not always confidence. Sometimes it is fear wearing impressive clothing. The need to be constantly heard can be a sign that one has never learned to be inwardly settled. Real power is often quieter. It appears in restraint, in the ability to listen without rushing to defend oneself, in the discipline of speaking only when words improve the silence rather than simply interrupt it. A calm person unsettles chaos because he is not easily pulled into it. He does not surrender his peace to every provocation. Silence also deepens attention. When the mind is no longer scattered by endless stimulation, it begins to notice what was always there. The subtleties of a conversation, the beauty of ordinary things, the quiet warnings of conscience. We miss much of life not because it is hidden, but because we are too noisy to perceive it. Presence requires stillness. This is true in relationships as well. To truly listen is one of the rarest forms of love. Most people do not listen, they wait for their turn to speak. They prepare replies while the other person is still revealing themselves. Silence, in this sense, becomes generosity. It creates room for another person to exist without being immediately interrupted by our own importance. There is also spiritual strength in silence. A restless soul cannot pray deeply because prayer requires more than words, it requires attention. Reflection, gratitude, repentance, wonder. These things do not thrive in constant noise. They require a person willing to remain still enough to notice what is eternal beneath what is urgent. Silence is not passivity, it is discipline. It is the refusal to let every distraction claim authority over your mind. It is the decision to step back from the crowd long enough to remember what matters. The man who can be alone without loneliness, quiet without anxiety, and still without boredom possesses a freedom many never discover. Such silence is not empty, it is ordered. It creates space for thought, for conscience, for deliberate action. It teaches patience in a culture addicted to speed. It reminds us that not every problem requires immediate reaction, and not every discomfort must be escaped. Some truths arrive only when we stop chasing them and become quiet enough to receive them. And perhaps that is why silence feels so powerful. It returns us to ourselves. Beneath the noise of ambition, fear, comparison, and performance, there remains the simple question of who we are when nothing external is demanding our attention. Many avoid silence because they are afraid of the answer, but only there can real strength begin to grow.